In this video, we are going to talk about Java collections. Basically, collections means that a list of objects or maybe a list of data type. In previous videos, we have seen how to save an array of objects or maybe primitive data types inside a simple array. And this was the way that we do it. For example, if we wanted to save an array of a string, we could say a string with a pair of square brackets. For example, names is equal to new string with a pair of a square bracket. Inside the square bracket, I need to pass the size of my array. But there are many limitations to this way of defining a simple array in Java. For example, if we want to change the size of our array, we couldn't do that. The size of simple arrays in Java cannot be changed after the definition, and as we might call it in programming, their size is immutable. Of course, if we want to add another name, for example, to this names array list, we could have create another for loop, maybe another array list, and then add all these names to that array list, and after that add our new name. Let's create a for loop in here, but before that, let's create another simple array. Let's call it second names is equal to new string with the size of 6. Then we could create a for loop, for example, int I is equal to 0, I less than our names array list dot length and I plus plus. Inside the for loop, we can say second names array list with an index of I is equal to our names array list with an index of I. This way we are copying all the values inside the names array list into the second names array list. And after the for loop, we can say something like second names with an index of 5, which represent the 6th element, is equal to, let's say, Mason. This way we could have add another element to our existing array list, but it's not efficient. And as you can see, there are a lot of codes that you need to be worried about. And also there is another problem. Imagine you have a popular application which has millions of users. If you save all the usernames inside a simple array, and if a new user sign up in your application, if you want to add the new username to the existing array list, you need to go through all the usernames and copy the whole array list, maybe a million, one more time. That's not efficient, not for the application side and also not for the web server side. Instead of using simple arrays, we can use another type of collections in Java called ArrayList. Let me define a new array list and we will talk about it. I don't think we have seen this syntax before, but this is how you can define a new array list. You type array list with a capital A, you put a pair of diamonds or maybe anchor brackets. Inside the diamonds, you need to define the type of data that you are saving. For example, I'm going to save an array list of names, so my type would be a string. Then, like a new class, you type new array list. Notice that if you are using Java 1.8 and higher, this is going to work fine, but if your Java version is lower than that, you need to pass the data type inside these anchor brackets as well. Right now, if I type a string in here, you can see that it's not using it. You can simply delete it. ArrayList is a Java class which implements the list interface. We will talk about interfaces in future videos, but for now you just need to know that interfaces are a contract between, let's say, two classes and contain some rules that two classes need to implement. We will talk about interfaces in future videos. For now, let's just define one. The list interface that I was talking about is this one. As you can see left in here, you can see that the icon is different. The C icon stands for class. This I with a green background stays for interface. I can say list of a string. Let's call it new names is equal to new array list this time. This is two ways of defining a new array list, but more on interfaces in future videos. Now let's talk a bit about the flexibility that ArrayList brings to us. For example, if I want to add another element to my existing array list, I can simply type the name of my array list, a dot operator, and say add. As simple as that. I can pass the value that I want inside the parentheses. I can do this as many times as I want. The size of array lists in Java are not immutable, so you can change it. If you want to have access to some elements in your array list, you can simply pass the index of that array list. Let me print the first item. I can say names.get, and the first item's index would be 0, so it should print Maysam in this case. Because it's the first time, I need to right click and run the program from this menu. Like usual, because it's the first time, I'm getting a warning. Let's build our project once again, and the error should be gone. You can see that the first element has been printed. And if I want to, let's say, clear all the objects inside my array list, I can simply type names.clear. As simple as that. This clear method will clear all the items from my array list. For example, if I print the size of my array list, I can say names.size, as simple as that, and I should get 0 in this case. You can see that all items from my array list has been cleared. Let me copy this line of code before clearing the array list. You should get 2 in this case. It's working fine. Let's comment these 2 lines of code for now. I'm using Ctrl/ if you are wondering how am I commenting these lines. Also, if you want to remove a specific item from your array list, you can say the name of your array list dot remove. You need to pass the object in here. For example, let's remove Maysam from our array list. If I print the size of my array list once again, it should return 1. Let's say names.size. You can see that the size of our array list is 1. Let's comment this line of code as well. Also, I have a lot more options. For example, if I want to get the index of some elements from my array list, I can simply say names.index of that specific object. For example, Maysam. Let's print this whole line. Let's say index is plus that line. We know that Maysam is first element, the index of first element is 0. We can also check that if one element exists in our array list or not. For example, I can print this line of code. I can say names.contains, the method that we are going to use, check if our array list contains, for example, 0. In this case, our array list does contain 0, and this contain will return a boolean. If you want to check what the return type of a method is, you can click on the name of your method and press Ctrl Q. Let me minimize the run window from here. Once again, Ctrl Q. You can see the different types, the parameters that method needs, maybe the return type. You can see that boolean true if this list contains the specific element. But you probably won't get this documentation if you haven't installed that Android documentation that I installed at the setting up environment. And if you haven't downloaded and installed that documentation, you can go up to this Tools tab in here and select SDK Manager. Inside the second tab, SDK Tools, check this one, Documentation for Android SDK. Download and install this one, and after that, this Ctrl Q would be available for you. Once again, if I press Ctrl Q, you can see a list of options and information about that specific method. It will help you a lot in order to debug and maybe understand the methods that you are using. But let's run this application. It should print true in this case. You can see that true has been printed. But if I put MESAM in here, because we have removed MESAM in this line, I guess, we should get false. You can see that MESAM does not exist in our array list. You can also check that if your array list is empty or not. Let's print another statement in here. I can say names dot is empty. This method in here, as you can see, the return type is a boolean, and if our array list is empty, it should return true. Right now we have 2 elements or 1 element in our array list. Our array list is not empty. But be aware that you can only save objects inside an array list. For example, if I try to create another array list of type integer, it won't work. You can see that type argument cannot be of primitive data type. Instead of this int, I can type integer with a capital I. This integer is a class in Java which represents the exact integers, but it's just an object. You can use this one or maybe a boolean if you want, or other type of primitive data types like double. They all have the equivalent Java class. But it's important to know that you can only store objects inside an array list. Also, you can store customized data types inside an array list. I mean the classes. Let me create another class in here. I'm going to call it a student. Our student would have only a name, private string name, and maybe an ID. A quick constructor, and getters and setters. We know that classes are customized data types. Now if I try to create an array list of my students, I can do that. Let's say students is equal to new array list. As simple as that. You have other options for your array list as well. Let's see those options. By typing dot, you can see the list of those options. For example, the one that we haven't talked about is this add all. It's useful if you want to copy your array list. The other one that is useful is this remove all. It will remove all of your objects from your array list. It's similar to clear, and maybe the other things as well, but more about that in their place. Okay, ArrayList was one type of collections in Java. There is another collection in Java called map. Once again, map is an interface. As you can see the icon in here. We will talk about interfaces in future videos, but for now, you need to know that maps are key value pairs, and as you can see the K and V in here. K stands for key and V stands for value. You can define your map this way. You can say map inside the anchor bracket. You need to define the type of your objects. For example, for key, I'm going to say string, and maybe for the value, string as well. Let's call it map is equal to. In here, I can say new map, this one in here, but it's generating me a lot of codes that I don't need to know anything about. Instead of this way of defining a map, I'm going to say new hash map. As simple as that. Hash maps are a class in Java and are different from map, but the topic is a bit technical and I don't intend to get into that topic, but you just need to know that you can create a new map by using new hash map. Now that I have created my map, I can save values inside this map. For example, I can say map.put is the method that we are going to use in order to add something to our map object. In here I need to pass 2 elements. The first one is the key. For example, let's say user1, and as the value, because I have defined a string in here, I need to pass a string as the value. For example, let's say MESAM once again. This way I have put a pair of key value inside my map. And if I want to have access to that element, I can say map.get. Inside the parentheses, I need to pass the key of that object. For example, in here, I need to pass user1. Let's print this line. If I try running my application, I should see MESAM in the console. Once again, for maps, for both key and value, you can't use primitive data types, and you are only allowed to put objects in here. For example, I can't type int in here. Integer won't work. Like ArrayList, you have a variety of options for maps as well. For example, I can say map.put, we have seen, it's equivalent to add in ArrayList. Clear, you can guess it, it will clear all the values from our maps. This contains key, it will look to our map and it will check that if some key has exist in our map, contains value, does the same thing for the values. This get will get the value, we have seen that up in here. Is empty will check that if our map is empty or not. Remove will remove some object, you need to pass the key to this method. The size will return the size of our map. These values will return all the values inside your map. For example, in this case, I'm using a string as the data type of my values. I can save all of those values, for example, let's say in an array list. You can see a lot of options are here. We will use them during the course. Maps and array lists are two types of collections in Java. There are others as well. For example, sets and hash sets. And if you want to check all of them, I suggest you take a look at this Oracle web page. You can see a list of all the collections available in Java language. But I'm not going to cover all of them because we won't be using these collections in Java. We probably will always be using ArrayList and maybe sometimes maps. Okay, that's all we need to know about collections in Java. I think we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to talk about another kind of loops in Java called for loops. In the previous videos, in loops video, we have talked about for loops, maybe while loops, but there is another kind of loops called for each loop. Let me clear my code and let's create an array list of kind maybe student. Let's call it students. New array list. Let's add some students to this array list. Students.add, let's say new student. We had a name and an ID. One more student maybe. New student. Let's say Sarah this time, and an ID. Okay, if I want to loop through this array list, I can use a for loop like we did before, but instead there is an easier way. I can create a for each loop. I will type the syntax for a for each loop and then I will talk about it. Inside the parentheses of for each loop, first you need to define the type of object that you are looking into. For example, in here it's a student. Then you need to put some name in here. It doesn't matter what you put in here. For example, I put S in here. You can say a student or something like that. After the name, you need to put a column. And after that, you need to put the array list or maybe the collection that you are looping through. Inside the for each loop, you can use that S in order to, let's say, print the name of your student. This S is like I in a for loop, but instead of getting the index of some item inside an array, you are getting the whole object. This for each loop might be useful from time to time. For example, when you don't know about the size of your array, it's an alternative for loops. Okay, I think that's enough for this video. In the next video, we are going to talk about some small concepts like a static keyword. We will talk about interfaces, abstract classes, and maybe some more. Okay, see you in the next video.